Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the State of the Startups. My name is Mei Li, and until recently, I was the Dean of the School of Entrepreneurship and Management at ShanghaiTech, a brand new university in Shanghai that I helped start. I'm very pleased to be here with all of you and with this extremely august panel. You've read all of their bios, so I'll simply introduce their name and make a couple of comments. To my immediate left here is Tony Elumelu from Nigeria, Alice Cass from Imperial College, Will.i.am, needs no introduction, and Badr Jafar, a businessman and philanthropist from the United Arab Emirates. I'd like to actually note two specific things about this panel and what makes them so extraordinary. What you have here is a group of people who have found excellence, and in that excellence, passion, and then purpose. And in many ways, that is the definition of the most successful entrepreneurs. And I see in each of these individuals in their own respective areas of expertise, extraordinary success. But I think second, and perhaps more importantly for this panel, is the fact that you have three individuals who are successful business people in the private sector, who have then taken a new lens and view on entrepreneurship from the perspective of development and inclusion. And I think that private-public partnership and perspective and strategy is something that I'd like to talk about today. We spend a lot of time talking about entrepreneurship through the Silicon Valley narrative and increasingly through the Chinese narrative, which I'm most familiar with. But today I think we have individuals from different regions of the world, particularly the Middle East and Africa, and then of course from the inclusion perspective in the United States and the UK. And I'd like to use today as an opportunity to share some of those stories and experiences. For the panelists, I'd like to encourage you to engage in a dialogue, feel free to interrupt or ask each other questions. And the last thing I'd like to say is a thank you to Tony. This was really his brainchild, this particular panel. I think he was very anxious to bring forward this narrative of lessons from different regions and institutions to share with the WEF. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'm going to actually start with Badr on the far side. Entrepreneurship and innovation, topic of the centuries, topic of the moment. Entrepreneurship is very broad, means very different things. Could you share with us the type of entrepreneurship that you're focused on in your endeavors, and then the type of programs that you've instituted and where you've seen success?
Sure. So, broadly speaking, there's four types of entrepreneurship that we see happening in our markets, and probably around the world as well. There's your legacy company entrepreneurship. These are your larger incumbents that in order to stay relevant, they have to keep innovating. So they implement intrapreneurship, and there's a stat which that in the 60s, the average lifespan of a company was 60 years. Apparently now it's less than 15 years. So to put that into context, more than 40% of Fortune 500 companies will be dead within 10 years. So it's a kind of innovate or die model. You then have the small business entrepreneurship. This is the majority of companies out there. They're not trying to take over the world, but they have to act, or at least the founders have to act like entrepreneurs, because it's a pretty crowded space. And then you have the scalable startups and entrepreneurship. These are the unicorn wannabes. They are trying to take over the world, and when the world's not enough, they go to Mars and the moon and asteroids. And it's an exciting space, but it does get, I think, a disproportionate amount of venture capital and perhaps also media attention because of the perhaps overinflated or oversized valuations. And then finally, my favorite category, which is the social entrepreneurship, and that's just people who just want to make the world a better place. We at Crescent Enterprises, or CE, try and be active in all four of those categories. I'll just quickly give two examples. So we recently, a couple of years ago, set up our corporate venture capital arm, and that really invests in startups around the world. It keeps us relevant and excited about what's going on, but I think it also helps to raise the activity within our startup communities. We've invested $1 million over the last couple of years in startups around the world. We've committed another $150 million over the next 3 years. We'd like to see at least 50% of that being invested in the Middle East and North Africa. And then finally, there's our corporate incubator, or CE Creates. And that's really just nurturing the next sort of a pipeline of new businesses and new ventures, again, within the company, but giving a space for entrepreneurs in the region to come and set up their own businesses It's a higher risk, of course, venture in itself, but again, in the space of not too many years, we've been able to nurture a few companies that have instituted, I guess, dozens of entrepreneurs and created hundreds of jobs. So that's also an exciting way, I think, to promote entrepreneurship within communities.
So, Will, you are a businessman and an entrepreneur as well as a philanthropist encouraging entrepreneurs. Could you talk a little bit about how I.AM.PLUS and then your foundational work integrate and work together?
Yeah, so like most urban musicians or athletes, we come from poor neighborhoods where education was low funded and the teachers in our schools weren't the best. Crime, drugs in our communities. And the way out was either sports or music. And I got out, moved my whole family out, and took me around the world. And whenever there's a tsunami or an earthquake or some natural disaster or someone's running for president, they call the world of music or the arts to raise awareness around the issue. And we would show up. When it was Bande Aceh tsunami there, I was there. Spent my birthday there doing tsunami relief. When there was Katrina, we're there. But I realized in every single ghetto, there's a tsunami and an earthquake every day. It's a tsunami of, no opportunity, an earthquake with no funding, and, terror with just the conditions of living. And I wanted to, change my neighborhood by not encouraging kids to be musicians because our industry is not healthy anymore. I wanted to, to encourage my kids to be computer scientists, engineers, and so we started a robotics program, a computer science program, just under 10 years ago. But when I would leave, after I would encourage my kids, they would look at me like, really, Will? I mean, you're not doing it. I want to do music. So I realized that I had to lead by example. So I took my earnings from beats and started my own company and went out I knew Silicon Valley was going to take me serious. So I went to Bangalore, India and Israel and started acquiring talent. And in the past 6 years, we built a voice operating system, artificial intelligence platform that is currently being used by Deutsche Telekom in Austria for customer service. We got an investment from Salesforce every single round. We've raised $117 million to date. But as exciting as that sounds, you gotta see it from my perspective. I'm in the public's eye. And I'm failing in front of everyone, risking failing in front of everyone. And so that's what I tell my kids, like, yo, you have to be fearless. You can't be comfortable. You have to, have the thirst to fall and get up. You have to want to fall and get up and learn. And so because of that, the performance that the kids have and how we transform their lives is significant. We go to kids that are underperforming, in and out of juvenile hall and crimes way, and rehabilitate their grades from 1 point failing GPA to 3.5s and 4.0s. 100% of our kids graduate to go to college, 80 of which are going to school for robotics, computer science, and engineering. Because they see, well, if Will can do it, and he's from our neighborhood, we could do it too. Because who are their role models? If you tell a kid, hey, you should, be like Elon Musk, he's like, well, what are you talking about, Will? I'm Latino. Like, okay, well, then you need to be like Carlos Slim. If I tell a kid, you need to be like, Michael Dell, not Michael Jackson or Michael Jordan, they're like, well, who do I have to follow the path of? So with African Americans or folks from Africa in the world of, tech, who do you have? So that's the reason why my entrepreneurial activity and philanthropy is the why to my what. It's to lead the way and not be afraid to fail. And the milestones that we have, where it's not like operating system come around every month. Apps do. So we have certified and passed, TA and AT&T and 3 and EE, and it's pretty significant to have a voice OS. We acquired a company called Wink, and that's the hub that Google Home uses and Alexa uses to connect the house. And that's pretty significant from someone who was a statistic to fail. Riding around the projects on a bike, sitting in welfare line with your mom for cheese and milk and WIC checks. So we are at a crossroads where this new technology is going to create jobs that come from folks that have been left behind if you encourage, inspire, and support 9-year-olds to take an interest. And you have to go that early, 9, not 13, 14, 15, it's too late. 9 years old. In every single ghetto, village, slum, and protect them, encourage them. And that's the purpose and the path.
Thank you. So we're going to go from one educator to another, and that is Alice. Can you talk a little bit about Imperial College's work? I mean, obviously it's an engineering school. You're educating STEM students, but I think that you have embarked on a number of initiatives that go beyond that around the issue of inclusion and enfranchising students in disadvantaged neighborhoods.
Sure, and thank you very much. And Will, you're terrifically inspiring, and all I can say is thank you for what you do. Both of you, it's really exciting to see this kind of engagement beyond the traditional. So let me just start by saying Imperial College London is one of the top research universities in the world. And so of course, when you talk about the state of startups and you think about things we do, our academics, staff, faculty and students, postdocs and graduate students really do a lot of work in the startup world. And this is incredibly important. And I think it's important that we get the discoveries in research out into society as quickly as possible. And sometimes that's through a startup because a corporation's not interested. Other times it's through a corporation. But it's an important mission for society. More and more you'll see some of our academics really working hard on frugal innovation, on low-cost solutions to world problems. We had a wonderful ideas lab. One of my colleagues is here. And that's an important element of how we get things out to society. The second area I think that is growing in importance and has in the last 5 to 10 years really blossomed is our own students. Giving students the freedom to take those risks. While they're in university, they should have the opportunity to try some really outlandish things, some risky things, and really learn about how to get their ideas out there. And so student entrepreneurs are incredibly important. Now, for both students and staff, we have mentoring, we have incubators, we have spaces. For our students, we've created an enterprise lab where they can meet one another, they can meet with mentors. They will get that kind of support and input that they need. And importantly, we started a program for women entrepreneurs. We found that the Dragon's Dens were being won by the men, and we found that when we put up a prize for women, a whole bunch of them showed up, and guess what? They started winning the Dragon's Den. And our Venture Catalyst Challenge, our We Innovate for Women Entrepreneurs is going strong. And what's exciting to me is even if that idea doesn't fly, they go on to do other things. They have learned that they can do this, and they try other entrepreneurial activities, and you'll see them winning other prizes. So those are the traditional areas. But we've also been working very hard on a new campus in a part of London called White City, named for the 1908 Franco-Britannic exhibition, and the Olympics were there. It's the first Olympic park in London, and it's a very deprived neighborhood. If you take the tube from the Central Line from Bond Street to White City, the average life expectancy drops by 9 years. It's a neighborhood like you grew up in. And we recognize that the kids in that neighborhood are not likely to come into our normal science outreach, our normal schools programs. They're not even that engaged in their schools. They need other things. So we took some space and we created what we call the Invention Rooms. These are maker spaces where the community is welcome to come in and work on projects. They can follow their own ideas. They can get help from Imperial students and staff. They can really follow their dream and be inspired by Will and go try to make and do something. We have maker challenges, and it's so exciting to see these kids working on their project, and how often their ideas are related to their lives and how they aren't the kind of things that our university students would have thought about. But what I'm most excited about is we have maker spaces, we have maker challenges, we have hackathons and hack spaces for older community members. What I'm most excited about is I think that making something changes your view on your capabilities. It gives you confidence. And I'm a big fan of the concept of the IKEA effect. If you've made one of those little shelves and you take it with you because you're attached to it because you made it, even though it's not really it's a bit shabby, you hang on to it and you're proud of it. These kids come in and they make something and they're proud of it. And they realize, hang on, I could do this. And they start to see themselves in a different light. And then we have the ability to help them in their schools and in their communities. And immediately in the first months, we had a kid already wanting to mentor other kids in his school and bring them in. So this is the kind of thing that I think is really important. I think every institution, corporations, universities need to figure out how to provide hope and provide new opportunities for these kids. I guess my question to my colleagues or for later is how to scale it. It feels like a drop in the ocean sometimes. And can we get others involved? Can we get others to follow our footsteps?
So Tony, you are the chairman of one of the largest banks in Africa. You've grown it across, I think it's 22 countries. And you've used that platform then to move into encouraging entrepreneurship, again, across African countries. And I wonder if you could share with us the model that you've used and the motivation for how you think about entrepreneurship.
Thank you. So first is, I'd like to commend Klaus, the chairman of WEF, for making this possible. I had written to him a few months back after the last year's Davos to say that for this kind of global gathering of political and business leaders, something was missing. What I thought was missing was conversation around entrepreneurship, about startups, about the future business leaders. We all are here today, but at some point in time, we were just startups. And I also felt in particular that African entrepreneurs needed a voice at a global stage like this. And he was kind, gracious enough with his team to make this possible. So I'd like to say well done to him. More importantly, the case of entrepreneurship in Africa is huge. It's an interesting environment or continent. We have very young population. 60% of our population under the age of 30. And you know the consequences of this. Africa is not yet industrialized. Access to electricity on the continent is very poor. In fact, over half of our people don't have access to electricity. You know how that impacts entrepreneurship. So to me, the issue of unemployment that is a natural consequence of high population, low industrialization, low economic activity, is one that needed and demanded everyone's attention at this stage. Because if we fix it in Africa, the world will have peace. The world will be a better place. And looking at our own life and how we've come to where we are today, we took over a distressed bank some years ago, turned the distressed bank around, grew to the level where it became one of the biggest banks in Nigeria and West Africa, and now a leading Pan-African institution serving over 14 million customers across Africa with over 1,000 branches. And this bank, United Bank for Africa. We didn't get there overnight. And so the case is, how do we challenge, how do we replicate ourselves? How do we make sure we have great companies like this that can help create employment for our people? And that's why we started the Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Program, which is, we committed $100 million to the program to help a decade-long entrepreneurship program to help train, provide seed capital, mentor 10,000 Africans, 8,000 every year. A bigger issue that came up from this is, first we realized that capital was not everything about entrepreneurship. People have to be trained. People have to be mentored. People have to be handheld. People have to hear stories, success stories, as well as challenges and success and failures. These are things that motivate young people. We need to create economic growth for them. And so we designed the program in a way that we have a 12-week training, intensive online training, and I would engage you later to see how Imperial College can be part of that. We appointed 400 mentors across the world, and those of you who are here who are interested in becoming mentors for these young Africans, please visit the website of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and you get access to it, because they need support from everyone. We also created and continue to create networking platform and opportunities for them. They can trade among themselves. And then we provide seed capital, non-refundable $5,000 for them, each of the 1,000 young Africans. It costs across the 54 African countries. It's sector agnostic. All you need, as we say, is that your ideas can transform Africa. Because we have realized that for a long time, donor funds have come into Africa, a lot, billions of it. But unfortunately, we have not succeeded in moving the needle so much. And so to us, it's a question of what next. And we have seen that entrepreneurship startups is a way to go. And I want to use this platform to encourage everyone. We do say, or some people say, that wealth is like a talk show. Okay? We need to begin to change that narrative. And this should be a call to action. Everyone should commit to supporting startups. They actually have the future of the world. If we fix it at that level, extremism will come down, and so many challenges we have in the world today will be a thing of the past. Thank you.
Go ahead, Badr.
Yeah, no, but this is, I mean, look, I think it's a very important point, because entrepreneurship is also somewhat a buzzword. It's kind of cool to do, and all policymakers want to be involved. But and you take, for example, technology today, it kind of seems sometimes where you can't help but feel that Silicon Valley is the only place left on earth not trying to become Silicon Valley. But you ask yourself your question, if you are able to replicate the Silicon Valleys, take the Middle East and North Africa, for example. If we do have a Silicon Valley in the Middle East, will that solve all of our problems? Well, probably not, because technology itself doesn't drive change. Technology enables change. Technology is a tool, and we, the connected people, are the real agents of change. And time, I guess, will tell whether we've used those tools for the betterment of humanity and our habitat, or for the exacerbation of our own human flaws.
Probably.
So moving from really those entrepreneurship hubs for the sake of it, to really purpose hubs, or human-centric hubs, which are really tackling the challenges which Tony was mentioning, which exist, of course, in every shape and form, unfortunately, in the Middle East and North Africa, is really where the sweet spot is.
So actually, I want to key off of that comment and maybe something that's related to what Alice talked about, which is the scalability. So SMEs, and that term is defined quite broadly, let's say above 50 employees. In certain economies, employ 60% of the population and drive over 40% of the taxable revenues. But we also know a similar statistic, which is over 90% of startups actually don't make it. And so I wonder how, particularly Tony, Will, and then Badr, how you guys think about measuring success of your efforts, right? How you move those people from a startup of 1 or 2 people to an SME. They don't all have to be unicorns. They don't all have to be a Will.i.am or any of you, but I mean, they aspire to be. But for our economies, for employment, for retraining, how do you think about success and how you measure that for your efforts?
Can I? Okay.
Yeah. Look, I mean, sort of an extension of my previous point, it depends what challenges you're trying to address, right? So you measure them against those challenges. I don't want to use the term KPI, but those are, so you take, I mean, you mentioned, they don't have to be unicorns. Well, I think, with all due respect to the unicorns out there, it's not about chasing the next billion-dollar company for the sake of it, which might only, employ a certain number of people. It's about really identifying and nurturing those companies that are going to impact 1 billion people. So, Tony and I in our respective regions of the world share a very youthful, a very energetic, but an underutilized population. And if the businesses we're generating are not really creating opportunities for those people, for masses, hundreds of millions of people, especially when you consider that according to UF, 85% of jobs in 2030 don't even exist today, then you're not achieving anything. So you just have to start off with really the problem statements, not pretending you understand what the problem is, so doing proper assessment of what those issues are, and then building business solutions to address those challenges, and then you can measure your impact over time.
Will, how do you think about that?
Well, my reason is clear and laser focused, and it's how can I continue to be a beacon of light to the kids that I committed to. And they're not my kids. I don't know them but now they're family because I've chose to apply myself. And my mentality is if you start up and if the startup isn't working, you shut down and you start up again. And you start up, shut down, and start up again. You keep going, right? There's the whole. I come from a place where it was already hard then. I already came from a hellish place. So going through the motions now is actually luxury to be able to start up, shut down, and start up again. Because I have to do that for my kids.
Tony, your foundation, I think, is similar to Badr's efforts around employment, solving particular problems that are endemic to Nigeria and other African countries. But I also know that your foundation, as you look at the applicants to your foundation, how do you choose those particular individuals to enter your program? What metrics do you use to do that?
Okay, so every year we create awareness to these young Africans, and they apply. In fact, last year we got 98,000 applications, and unfortunately we were able to select 1,000, which is another, talking about scalability. We would like to scale it further because our commitment is just $100 million, but the needs on grants are a lot more than that. And so from when they applied, the 98,000, we have partnership with Accenture Consulting, the consulting firm, who pass it to Accenture, and they help us go through this based on certain criteria. One of the criteria is, scalability of the business. How sound the business is it scalable? And equally important is you look at the SDG, the goals, and say which of the SDG goals does the business initiative you have seek to address? And then we capture all of this. And these are the criteria that help to select the 1,000 that benefit from this. And we have seen that these young, energetic, intelligent Africans, male, female, in fact, the statistics is quite interesting because now, when we started, it was less than 30% female participation. But now, this last 2017, female participation was about 33%, so it's coming up. And the interesting thing about it is you see people who are interested in agriculture, in technology, in entertainment, and even sectors that you ordinarily advertise in, different people, because we just believe that ideas, you have great ideas, we don't know what can make it to the top. And so scalability starts from creating opportunity for people. People have to be given the opportunity, brought into the mainstream, and then they prove themselves, and you support them further. So it is important to us that the SDG goals, we see how we support them, and that the people we're training, we're helping, we're trying to help them to become self-reliant, independent, and also hopefully in future help to replicate this across the continent and other parts of the world so that collectively all of us will bring an end to poverty, which has been a major challenge for all of us.
Yeah, I think we have the opportunity to look at scale up in two ways. One is this issue of how do you scale up the startup, and I think that's very important, and the opportunity to collaborate with others, to collaborate with corporations. Sherry Kutu was formed, I think it's called scaleup.org or scaleup, which is connecting small enterprises with talented people looking for jobs because they don't have the recruiting budget to go out and hire the talent. And going beyond the mates they know from university, they can actually use this online approach. When I mentioned scale up, I was thinking more of the aspects of how can we have more Will.i.ams and more Invention Rooms. What we're doing, I think, is very important and very exciting. we're scaling it to the maximum we'll be able to have in our building with the people we have in our neighborhood. And it's a very local phenomenon because we want kids to walk down there, feel like it's part of their space. They can come in there, they can spend their time and spend their energy. And it's a challenge to think about how it scales to get to other neighborhoods that we're not touching. And so I think there is a call to action, much as there is with what you're talking about and what you're talking about. We can connect people further across the world, and we can also think about how we can benefit from copying one another and replicating some of these things and having other people of Will's stature get inspired to get back in there and do things like this.
So I have a question, particularly for Will here. So I view you as the ultimate educator.
The ultimate what?
The educator, right? I mean, you're educating students through your behavior. You're a role model. So I talked about the Silicon Valley narrative, and I think that there are certain things that are universal to entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are always looking for talent and capital, right? I mean, that's a kind of common thing. Something that's different from the Silicon Valley narrative that we've heard today is that we have business people selecting entrepreneurs based on goals other than the unicorn, right? Inclusion goals, sustainable development goals, and I think that's a really important message to take from today. But there's one Silicon Valley narrative that I, as an educator, rebel against, and that is the concept that failure is okay. And I say that for the following reason. You didn't actually fail. You're a massive success, as is every person on this panel. You have encountered obstacles, you've encountered difficulties, you've encountered circumstances that were unexpected. But I don't call those failures, and I wonder how you think about that as an educator. Is there alternative language that we can use? I just, as someone who teaches students, particularly in China, where failure is really not acceptable to any Chinese parents, is there, I mean, I teach entrepreneurship, right? So how do I say to my students, it's okay to fail? I don't, right? So I wonder, and we come from a different place. The United States has a different narrative. I wonder how you think about that, and are there ways that we can think about a different framework for that particular experience that all entrepreneurs face?
I have dignity, and I love my mom. And because of that, and moving forward, I need failure. Because it further reminds me of my purpose. You can't be afraid of the word failure, no matter what country you're from. Right? There's slow points. You're climbing up a mountain, it hurts. Think about going for a hike. It hurts when it's a steep hill. Do you stop? Even if you walk back, it's gonna hurt.
Downhill hurts more.
Right? So you can't be afraid of those pains when you're progressing. You can't be afraid of falling down, because you're gonna fall down.
But falling down's not failure.
No, but it is. It is.
Okay, so
there's
that's
nothing wrong with it.
Let me share perspective on this. So this is very interesting question you asked actually. Most time when I give speeches, people ask me this question. In fact, 2 weeks back, they asked me the same question. Mr. Elumelu, what are your failures? Okay, share with us, because we get inspired by the stories. And I say to people, first, okay, you were talking of the narrative. Failure, you can modernize it and say challenges, but the truth is, for every successful businessman you see, you've had many failures. Behind that person or even others who have failed. But with the world celebrates and sees just success, which is good. But it's good to tell people about resilience, about tenacity. And as Will.i.am was saying, you fall, you continue. That's what makes entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship journey is not a linear journey. It's up and down, but at the end of the day, when you plot it, you see an upward movement. And finally, what I say, by way of advice is, and maybe you can try this with your student, it's good to share my failure points. But more importantly, we should be interested in how did you overcome failures? And what are the learning points from failures? And not necessarily about, failures should be given. And there are basic principles that guide you. One, you must be very, very resilient. 2, you must think long term. Because if you think long term, short term failures don't set you back so much, because the journey is long. You talked about scale. The journey is a long journey. And most importantly, you need to laser focus, tenacity, laser focus, and just know that success will come at the end of the day if you're disciplined and you're focused. So I think we should talk to people about how to overcome challenges and failures.
So I agree. Look, what you have described, and the reason I think that when people ask me how do you teach entrepreneurship, there is a mindset around entrepreneurship that defines the very nature of human existence and a successful, responsible citizen, which is the tenacity and the focus to deal with challenges, right? So I think that piece is important. But Badr, I know you wanted to add to
I
this.
think it's maybe just a case of nomenclature here. I understand, cultures where failure is taboo. But really, for me, failure is only when you stop, like to Will's point. It's more, if you look at a kind of entrepreneurial journey, it's more really iteration. It's creative destruction. You learn why something didn't work, you pivot and you try again. And then if you keep trying, and there's no telling how many times you have to try, you eventually make it. And so that's, I think, important. But to take a practical case, and sometimes you learn the hard way why this is so important. In the Gulf region, there are examples where governments who really wanted to try and give young entrepreneurs a chance, they started giving them interest-free loans very easily and very quickly, really on production of a business plan that wasn't vetted or tried and tested by anybody. That was a disaster.
Yeah.
It was a disaster. And in fact, it killed, in many cases, the entrepreneurs' chances to actually establish a successful business. And they learned over time that actually the journey an entrepreneur goes through, having to iterate their business model and business plan through multiple rejections from financiers and from peers, was an essential part of the creation process. So now we've sort of tweaked those models in parts of the Gulf, which I think is great.
So I have a confession. I'm trained as a lawyer, so for us it's all about definition. And I think that maybe the question I was really asking is how do we define failure? Because it sometimes has a very negative connotation. And I think what you've described, I think quite accurately, is that it can be very positive for people who matter. Alice?
I'll just take a little bit of this on ourselves, because I think the higher education system has created great opportunity, great goals. People drive themselves to get into the best universities and do the best they can and always score well in everything. And parents are certainly very focused on that. And I think that we don't want to get rid of a system of excellence and being able to push people and have them really strive and reward them for doing well. On the other hand, I think we have to break down this cultural and real, the way that drives one into a fear of failure. And I would contend that what we've heard from all our colleagues is it's about lessons learned. And lessons learned in all the different things we've experienced in life. So perhaps one way to break it up a little bit, students are free from their parents, unless they're on the phone with them, at the university for a few moments, and have them reflect on life's lessons that they've learned. If they can actually embrace their own ups and downs in their lives and really look now at their life, not that they have this polished resume and they got into this university, but actually that this happened and they really kind of did learn that that wasn't a good thing. And
Yeah.
I mean, really get students to kind of personally internalize the idea that all through life we have decisions we've made that didn't work out so well, and we had to learn something from them and make a different decision the next time. And so and then I think the role models talking about their stories is incredibly important, and you standing up and telling your own story.
Yeah, so I think lessons learned is really, for me, is the key. And I think there's a Chinese story, actually, a fable that sort of sums up what this group has said. And I think some of you may know it. So there's a fable around a Chinese farmer. And he is in the field plowing, and his cow dies, his oxen dies. And everybody says, oh my God, that's awful. How are you going to harvest and plant? And he says, well, I don't know. We'll see tomorrow. And then the next day the army comes through and they say, oh, we're taking all the oxen. He says, well, I don't have one. Mine died. So everybody says, oh, you're so lucky. And he said, well, I don't know. We'll see, right? We don't know. And then the day after that, his son breaks his leg. So his son can't help in the fields. Everybody says, oh, that's terrible. He says, well, I don't know. And again, a week later, the army comes through and says, we're taking all the eldest sons. His son's leg is broken. It turns out to be a good thing. The point here being is that things don't turn out the way you expect, and you don't know what's good or bad, so you have to stick with it. And I think that's the lesson I hear from each of the people on this panel.
With a slight change, twist. Because we can't, no. You must be purposeful.
Yes.
So I don't quite buy the idea of you don't know. You must be purposeful, but just know that failures can only help you get to the
You don't know if it's good or bad. You have a purpose,
you have
but
to
you
have
don't
a
know.
proper destination.
Yeah. Will, go ahead, and then.
We're in a really amazing time in life right now in society, where it's reflective of like 1918, where electricity was coming into the world, lights, automobiles, airplanes, all that stuff was happening in the early 1900s. And Africa wasn't a part of the conversation. African Americans were not really a part of the conversation. And women were not a part of the conversation. The world that we live in today, this thing that we're experiencing with these lights, the plug, phones was popping off in the early 1900s. This is the world that we're living in. It's based on all the ideas that came from early 1900s. There was no music industry, there wasn't movies. If you were an actor, you were a theatrical person. If you were a singer, you sang in the opera. And all that dreams and imagination and J.P. Morgan and Westinghouse investing in all the thinkers and dreamers, early 1900s. 2018 is a whole new fourth industrial revolution. Just want to see why we all have to apply ourselves to acknowledge the power of the woman, not men give power to women. Acknowledge the power of the woman. We were born through a woman, and we need a balance to see the world that we live in today. And the Elon Musks of 2040 is a woman. The Steve Jobs of 2040 is someone from Africa. We haven't seen an apple from Africa. It's Southern Hemisphere has not contributed to the world yet. Think about that one. So we are going to see the next Googles come from Africa and Brazil if we do our job and protect and encourage and inspire 9-year-olds today. So 20 years from now, they're going to blossom and remember the efforts and the laser focus that we did. There's enough money. There's rich Africans. There are rich African Americans. It makes no sense that the Bronx is the Bronx and Watts is Watts. And Louisiana after the Katrina is what it is. But meanwhile, Shenzhen, the time is Katrina, was a swamp too. And now you go to Shenzhen, they're making everything. Right? That's the possibilities how you could change a whole entire region. When you inspire them, encourage them. And when I go to China, I'm like inspired. I'm like, yo, this place is popping. And the day that we were just talking, the day that we all, know the contributors of the phones that they make, is the day that China is going to really be not the American dream, but the China dream. You want to make something? I don't go to America to build our stuff. I'm going to freaking Shenzhen, China. It's amazing. This globalization and the folks that are leading the shift. It's awesome, and it's going to take collaboration, tolerance, understanding, appreciation, equality, looking to the next, and the answers aren't going to come from yesterday's leaders. They're going to come from the folks that are going to solve their own problems when you encourage them and empower them with today's tools that will change tomorrow.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time left. Can I just see a show of hands of how many people have questions in the audience? Okay, so before we get to the questions, I know Badr has something to say, and then I want to spend just 4 minutes around the topic that Alice raised, which is scalability. How do we scale each of your efforts? Do you have, Badr, lessons that you have from the UAE that you can share with Tony or Tony to share with Alice. I just 4 minutes on that topic after Badr.
No,
Talks
sure.
about-
No, I don't want to belabor this point, but it goes back to the thing of failure, and I think it's celebrating, celebrating the lessons learned, as opposed to failure in itself. And I recall an amusing experience where I don't know how many people have heard of FailCon, but it's basically this conference where people go and celebrate failure. And I went there. I was very curious, so I went there, and I think they were taking it a little bit too far, because there were examples where someone was like, and I lost $10 million. And the guys, is that it? I lost $100 million. I was like, woo, And so there was a little bit missing the point, but it was exciting, because there was, I guess there were some lessons being learned. So yeah, it's just not missing the point on that. But there is another aspect to failure which I think is important, and that's making sure that the enabling environment, which is in many ways nurtured by policymakers, doesn't persecute failure. And there are examples, again, I say from my part of the world, where in some countries, up until not that long ago, and in some cases still today, if you failed in your business and your business had taken out a loan, you're personally liable, you go to jail. So what does that say about a lesson to entrepreneurs to go ahead and try, and if you fall down, get back up? Because in this case, you fall down, you're behind bars. So I think that's just an important point to make. I think there's a lot that we can do. We don't have representation from policymakers as such, but there is a role that they have to play in creating that nurturing environment.
Yeah, I think in fact the point that I hear from all of you is what we don't want is to have people discouraged from trying. We need people to get out and try and to take the risk. I think that's the ecosystem and the environment that we're trying to nurture, and I think that's what I hear each of you talking about in your initiatives. But let's just spend 3 minutes, if we could. Again, let's start with Tony and work our way down. How you think about scalability? What are your challenges? What have you done that's worked?
So for us, our entrepreneurs, the Tony Elumelu entrepreneurs, we have about 30,000 of them now across Africa. What we're seeing is they need the right operating environment to succeed. And so I would say we need our government to help capacitize and create the right environment for these entrepreneurs. It's very, very important. You give them all the money, but if they have to take care of electricity themselves, water themselves, then the money cannot solve the problem. So that's one. Two, second point is, we need to encourage women to continue to show more interest in entrepreneurship. As I said, when we started, we had less than 30% interest from women. And what we did was to go all out and create more awareness, and now a lot more participating. So we need to encourage them. We need more female mentors to share their success stories and help encourage these females. Very, very important. And last point is, from reviewing our operation for the past 4 years, we realized that in the rural areas, we don't have it's skewed more towards people in the urban center than the rural area. Rural people need entrepreneurship more than even the urban people. So we need collectively to create more awareness in the rural area. So this year, we're going to give a little more opportunities to people in the rural area, because some of them don't even have access to internet to even apply. And so the challenge in the rural area is quite a lot, and we cannot fix unemployment, poverty, address inclusive growth and development if we do not, first, mainstream and prioritize our women participation, and two, people in the rural areas. Those are the areas we can do.
Alice?
We're in early days with the Invention Rooms. We've had we just opened about 6 months ago, first groups of students in. Our first goal is to go down to younger kids, mini makers, micro makers, nano makers, get younger kids involved, because the sooner you get at these kids, the sooner you change their outlook and have them change their trajectory and become a new level of participation in the opportunities available. Beyond that, if it works well, if we can learn from this, and we can certainly enlarge what we're doing there in that community, but we could also replicate it elsewhere. It's not clear yet, but hopefully.
So, Will, the only thing I can think about for scaling you is to clone you, but you might have different ideas.
So Mark Benioff is my hero. And he doesn't have to do the things he does. And I'm a clone of Mark. I'm an early Mark. He built his company Salesforce after working at Oracle and chooses to use his success to help out those with hospitals, police academies, and investing in entrepreneurs that are trying to change and lead with purpose. And I think the only way to exist as a company in the future is you have to be a purposeful company. Seeing how governments aren't governing properly, they leave holes for companies to fill these voids. Like I wouldn't have to have an after-school program if government had proper schools.
It's true.
I'm from California, so in California there's Googles, there's Apples, all the big giant companies. You would think it would be mandatory in 7th grade that everybody learns iOS and Android, or Linux, Unix, or DOS, or Windows. Guess what? In every single school, people have a football field and a basketball court. 2 companies benefit from that investment, NBA and NFL. There's not even a competitor in the NFL. So think about just how backwards our world is today.
Good point.
You cannot sustain that moving forward. And companies are going to be a lot like what they were in the early 1900s, like Ford's. Look how many jobs Ford created. It wasn't government that did that. People and companies are going, and this is a new jump off that we have right now, but instead of not just teaching alone is going to solve the problem, you need inspiration, like a jolt to inspire people to do the impossible and add a little craziness into, inspiration. Because that's what you need when you fall. You need to be crazy enough to get back up.
So just a reflection on the technology point, because I think one of the benefits of where we are with technology today is it actually reduces the importance of the economies of scale. So you don't necessarily need scale to be competitive. And the other aspect, of course, is borders become obsolete in some cases. You can transcend borders, both physical and rhetorical, much easier. But look, there's all the typical things that, you've already talked about. It's access to capital, access to talent, it's good infrastructure, a level playing field. One important thing which is potentially underappreciated because it's seen as the domain of large companies, and that's corporate governance. So I set up about 7 years ago something called the Pearl Initiative, which really focuses on the business case behind good governance. So why it's in self-interest of business people to adopt good governance beyond regulations and rules. And we realized we did fall into the trap of just working with large companies. But working, and sort of as a preventative measure, working at the startup phase, really at the seed phase, to try and institute certain measures. And they could be basic things like formulation of a board and an outward-facing board. Boards are like particle physics. They behave differently when someone's watching them. Yeah. And the other issue, and things like delegation of authority manuals, shareholder agreements, risk analysis, basic things like that, I think are critical and crucial to help companies scale faster. Yeah. So we've been doing an experiment with small businesses and startups now. It's actually more than an experiment now. It's 2,000 entities across the Middle East that's joined the survey to really understand how they view governance. And more often than not, they see it as something that they'll get to when they get big. So I just think that's a point worth making.
Okay, so in the remaining time, I've got a question over here, I think in the corner.
Thank you very much, everybody. Just a very quick thing on failure. I think failure is relative, and I, in one of my lifetimes, taught children from very underprivileged school. And, failure is not a good word, because by the time they're 3 or 4 years old, they actually see themselves as failures. And they don't even try to be able to fail. The inertia and anger that comes out of that is really, really damaging. So that's just a small thing about failure. This is once you get to a certain stage. This week, I have been with a lot of social entrepreneurs outside the Congress Hall. There are some extraordinary things being done, and scaling is one of the big things. But from the big ones, from Tata, from Veolia, and then from the smaller ones, Spring Accelerator, lots and lots of people. She Deserves movement. They are really pushing through. You would have thought by now we would have an amazing, amazing planet, very successful planet. And what I feel that is underlying all this is, yes, corporate leadership counts, but their political leadership, despite what's going on today, really, really counts. You can have the political will, but the political leadership is not there, and kids are not being trained to understand what political leadership means. Whatever governments are going to look like in the future is a different thing. As long as we're people and we're functioning as people and within different entities, we have a political part to how we function. And I urge you, if you could, to start political entrepreneurship. Training, and I really mean scaling this up and training people to understand how to enable. This planet should be booming now. It should be blooming, and it isn't. And that's political leadership failure. Now that's a big failure. So I urge you to focus on that, not just social entrepreneurship. I don't think we're all going to do it. So political leadership, please.
Thank you, Tricia. I think there's a question, gentleman in the middle here. So we have a minute, so quickly.
Okay. So first of all, my name is Renier. I'm a student here in Switzerland, and I'm very, very honored to be here at the World Economic Forum. So I have a business idea. Without any details, I want to create an app which will improve school productivity. My problem is I have no idea how to program, and I have no idea how to create an app. And my question is, how do I pursue something, and this something being the app, which I have no idea in how to create?
I'm fascinated by programmers and developers. I always blown away by how people can create something from nothing just by code. But to you just have to learn how to network and find talent. And with a good idea, you're going to attract the right talent. And you don't have to learn how to code to be able to learn how to bring together a cluster of folks to manifest that idea.
So we're out of time. I apologize. I knew that an hour wasn't going to be enough time with these four people. But I want to thank all of our panelists. As I said at the beginning, they're an extraordinary group. So please.